Hi, I'm James Naylor Green, professor of Brazilian history and culture at Brown University and the national co-coordinator of the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil. And this is Brazil Unfiltered. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Thiago Amparo. I recently met Thiago when he was invited to speak at Brown University. He gave a great talk, and afterward, I invited him to come on to Brazil Unfiltered. Thiago is a lawyer, scholar, professor, and human rights activist. He has a weekly column in the Folha de São Paulo and hosts of the podcast Quem, tanto, noticia, Who Reads So Much News, which since its launch earlier this year continues to be one of Brazil's most listened to news podcasts. Thiago is currently living in New York City, where he is a visiting professor at New York University Law School. In our conversation, Thiago speaks in depth about the structural discrimination of Black and LGBT communities in Brazil. So let's go to the interview. Thiago, it's just an honor to have you today on Brazil Unfiltered. Thanks for coming on to the program.
No, thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Great. Well, so I have read on Instagram and seen in other places on social media that you're going to get married. So you want to tell your listeners a little bit about this story?
Yes. Well, it's very exciting. Right now, I was until last weekend, I was in my pre-wedding honeymoon, I would say. I'm getting married next weekend in Brazil with Leonardo, my boyfriend that we are dating for the last 3 years and living together in São Paulo, Brazil. And it's very nice to, this moment is very nice. It's very personal, very touching. At the same time, it's also nice to talk about it and to post about it as well, because I receive a lot of messages, especially from young LGBT people, especially young and Black LGBT people writing to me saying, "Oh, thank you very much for posting it. Thank you very much for talking about your relationship." Not in the sense of showing off or in the sense of saying that any relationship is perfect or anything like this, but actually to showing real people, loving each other and either getting married or having any kind of relationship. So it's very exciting, and I have received a lot of kind of a very nice message from people that I do not know personally, and it's very touching. So yeah, that's what is happening now.
That's wonderful. And so what was your process of coming out, of kind of discovering your own sexuality and understanding it for yourself and then for your family and your friends? What was that like?
So, there is, I think my life as a younger gay guy in São Paulo was, it's very common if we think about, especially young Black LGBT people that live in the outskirts of São Paulo. In São Paulo, as probably the listeners know that, but of course it's a big city. But there's a lot of LGBT things, activities, events, parties, and so on going on. But at the same time, you have very conservative outskirts of the city or neighboring cities in the large São Paulo. And I was born in a city called Osasco, which is next to São Paulo, in the outskirts of São Paulo. And basically there it was a very low or middle class life, with very conservative and I grew up in evangelical family, and for me my trajectory as a gay person when I was young was very much in the closet. I never received any kind of a clear discrimination from my family or for my closest friends, but of course I was afraid of coming out when I was young, and I could not talk about that because my social activities were about the church, going to the church, or hanging out with my parents, or hanging out with the people in my neighborhood, or the people in my school. And I did not have any back then. I did not have any kind of people that I could look at and think, okay, this is a gay person and I could live a life like this person. I did not have any kind of model in that sense. Back then, I would say that in the 90s and early 20s, especially in the 90s, there were some LGBT people on TV, but especially when they were in a very prejudice, in kind of a stereotypical way, and they were in a very not in a way that I could relate to. And so for me, it was a long process of coming out, not because I was suffering from the clear discrimination, but especially because I did not feel comfortable. And I did not have any kind of social environment of friends or connections that in which I could be openly gay. And then I think things started changed when I went to university. I went to law school at the Catholic University in São Paulo, PUC São Paulo. And then I started meeting new people, and then I started. But first, my social environment was basically comprised of heterosexual women that accept me, and then we went out, and then in that moment on, I realized that I could be openly gay in that environment. So I would say that my life, and also I see, for instance, when I go to the gay parade in São Paulo, which is one of the largest ones in the world, I see a lot of young people, especially young, poor Black people from the outskirts. And I see myself in them because I remember that going to the gay parade and telling my mother, oh, I'm just going to my friend's birthday. So it was clear that she could see on TV that there was a parade going on. So it was obvious, but it was it was a way to preserve myself, to not expose myself and to any possible comment that I would not like. So I see myself in those people that sometimes had to live multiple lives at the same time, and I think that I'm very glad that I managed to overcome that. And I think I did that especially because I found my place. I found the people that I like. I found the people that accept me. My family accepts me.
What was that like when you came? Are your parents still religious? Are they still evangelical?
Yes.
Christians?
Well, my mother passed away 3 years ago. But my father and my sister, for instance, she's a pastor. Wow. In a evangelical church, and they all accept me. So my sister is going to my wedding, my father is going to my wedding, my aunt is going to my wedding, and for instance, my father, I was afraid because when I came out, I was already actually, I mean, they knew that I was gay, but I did not say those words, I'm gay. So until quite recently, and I said that in the context of introducing my boyfriend, because I didn't want to leave a lie. I didn't want to say that it was just a friend. And then his reaction was wonderful because he was like, yeah, I know already. And he became
they always
very close.
Know, right?
Yeah, they always know. And he became very good friends with my boyfriend. So it was really nice.
What a beautiful story.
Yeah. And then I think that what I learned from my coming out story is that you really need to find people that accept you no matter what. So you can find that in your family, sometimes a family member, maybe sometimes not your parents or your siblings, but sometimes they as well accept you. You have to find also among your friends or social relations. I see, for instance, the first time that I went out to a gay club, it was a gay club that I did not find comfortable because I was like a fat kid, and I went to a gay club, in those clubs that people take off their shirts, and I was like, okay, I'm not welcome here either. So this was like a process of finding, the people that like things that I like cinema, art, and stuff like this. The people that have a lifestyle that I can share. So I think that what made my coming out story a nice thing was basically finding my place and finding my by finding my place, I mean finding the people that like you and that like the way you are. And so this was basically my coming out story.
Wonderful. So let's jump right into the people who don't like LGBTQ people.
Yeah.
The current government in Brazil, Bolsonaro. What's the impact of his presidency, do you think, on first the LGBT community and then the Black community? And I want to talk a lot about race in this conversation today. But what have you noticed has been the impact of 3 years of Bolsonaro?
I think that we saw the impact of Bolsonaro's election right before he won the election. The data that we have from 2018, the year of the election, is that, of course, as you know, Brazil has a very poor data on LGBT discrimination, on racial discrimination. But what we have is that the number of complaints of LGBT discrimination against LGBT people in Brazil increased sharply during the months of the election. I remember during the election, several activists, and I participated in one of those groups. They were developing, kind of a guides for people when they go to the police to report some violence or hate speech online or things like this. So there was an environment of a kind of unstable and violent environment during the election. Also, we have data that we are talking about marriage. The number of LGBT people getting married increased sharply during the election. And
why do you think that happened?
Especially because people were afraid that their rights will be taken away. That's my feeling, and they wanted to. If that happens, they want to have some kind of protection. Say, well, we already got married, so you cannot take that away from us. And also, what is interesting that I just found out a few weeks ago that the numbers of LGBT people getting married now is also increasing again, which shows that people are already thinking about the election next year and what might happen next year. So I think that there was a very clear personal and social impact on mental health, on the number of violence, on also affecting people's decision to get their rights and to protect their rights in a way. But when you look from the perspective of the not only the election but also the beginning of the Bolsonaro's candidacy and presidency, is that he made the LGBT issue a central point of his agenda. So I used to hear people used to say before, well, Bolsonaro's election is he's clearly homophobic, but it's not. He doesn't have like agenda on LGBT rights, or he doesn't have a policy on LGBT rights. I do think he has a policy. He has a policy anti-LGBT rights, and this is central to his constituency and essential to his way of thinking about politics. He really thinks that politics is about crushing those groups that are gaining rights, crushing those groups that are gaining spaces in politics, because he's in favor of that kind of politics of the enemy, that you should shoot your enemy in a way. So it's not exaggeration to say that, because his very sign during the election was a sign of a gun. So what I see in terms of policy is that I think in a way what is good is that Damares, his Minister of Human Rights, Family and Women's Rights, she's not as competent as other ministers in advancing a policy in real life. There is a sphere of homophobic, LGBT-phobic speech and comments all the time. So when Damares said that, well, boys should wear blue and girls should wear pink or something like this. There is this level of violence, which is more a symbolic, discursive violence, constantly from Governor Bolsonaro's administration. Bolsonaro already made homophobic comments against a reporter, a journalist that made him a question. So this kind of violence, in the discursive violence, happens all the time. But I think that at the level of dismantling the policies, what we see is that they managed to do certain things like dismantling all the participation in councils, boards at the federal level. So this was right in the beginning of the administration. They wanted to destroy the National Council of LGBT Rights. They wanted to destroy all actually human rights councils and boards, crushing the participation from the civil society organizations. Secondly, they fight against some improvements that we have. For instance, the government fought back against the criminalization of LGBT phobia. They were saying that this criminalization of LGBT phobia was established by the Supreme Court, and in the Supreme Court case, the position of the government was to try to recognize that this very wide religious objection possibility, so to allow anyone that uses a justification of religion to discriminate to be able to do so. So they are always fighting back against this.
Can I interrupt you on that just to get a sense? The Supreme Court did a very important thing, I think, in ruling that homophobic speech is equivalent to racist speech, and really kind of lump them together, which was pretty significant because this has been a demand of the movement for many years. Why do you think the Supreme Court did that? I mean, that was a bold move. What were they trying to signal, do you think, with that decision?
I think it was a very strong move, and especially because it was it didn't come out of nowhere. So it really was a pressure from LGBT movement, and I think especially movements and also the lawyers of the movements, Paul Yott and others, that try to think, they were really ambitious in their argument. Because if you think, I would not, if you asked me a few years ago if this case would actually be successful, I would say no. If a student asked me in the classroom, I would probably say no. And why is that so? Because it's the first time the Supreme Court says, well, we are actually talking about this criminal law, and we are interpreting this criminal law in a way that encompasses also another group that is not explicitly mentioned in this criminal law that criminalizes hate crimes. So and they did that because they really were convinced by the argument of the LGBT movement lawyers, saying that, well, this is also a matter of structural discrimination, such as like racism, and racism is already a crime, so this should also be considered a crime. And secondly, one thing that happened a lot is that the Constitution clearly says, does not criminalize explicitly LGBT phobia, but the Constitution is very explicitly mentioned that the law should punish discrimination. And they say the Constitution says in a very wide terms. So this was also used by the Supreme Court, and it's clear that the data that we have is that it's very clear that the Congress had several opportunities to pass a law on that topic and did not do so.
Right.
And the Supreme Court, what they said is that, well, the Constitution mandates that, so it's not a matter just of a policy choice. It's actually what the Constitution determines as obligation of the state to criminalize discrimination. And in the eventual case where the Parliament decides to pass a law criminalizing it, this law would prevail over the decision of the Supreme Court, in the sense that it would the law would apply. But of course, we are very far from having a law passed in those terms in the Parliament.
In fact, the Senate just approved Mendoza as the new Supreme Court judge, the person that Bolsonaro had appointed when he said he wanted someone that was very, very evangelical.
Terribly evangelical.
Terribly evangelical, exactly. So what do you think is the is going to be the impact? It's the second Supreme Court judge he's appointed. Is this going to tip the balance? Is he going to come onto the bench and then move his opinions, or will he says he's not going to bring his religious beliefs into Supreme Court decisions. Can we trust him on that?
I don't think so, especially when we look at the when you look at the scene where he was with the First Lady Michelle Bolsonaro, celebrating in religious terms, celebrating almost as a religious celebration of his confirmation, about his confirmation for the Supreme Court. And he really tuned down his religious views during the hearings in the Senate. So he was really saying that he was very well, he very much rehearsed before the confirmation hearings, because he was saying that, well, in my personal life, I followed the Bible, and in the Supreme Court, I followed the Constitution. He said that he's in favor of LGBT marriage, but I do think that this was a political strategy to tone down his religious views in order to get more votes. He actually passed and was approved by the Senate with the lowest margin among the judges that are there in the Supreme Court, but with some, because it's a secret ballot, so we do not know exactly who voted in favor, who voted against. But by the numbers, we can see that he also got votes probably from the left. So we do not know. How this gonna play out. What I do think is that it was a strategic and political move to tune down his religious perspectives. But once he's confirmed, then he's in the Supreme Court. I mean, he's free to do whatever he wants to do, and for a long time, because he's very young. He's 48. And what I think that probably what we can see is what happened with the other candidate, with the other justice appointed by Bolsonaro, which is Cássio Nunes, who was appointed few months ago, and he, several cases, he's kind of a outsider, or he's a dissenting opinion in several cases. Personally, I do think that Mendonça, in terms of his legal knowledge, he's better than Cássio Nunes. He's smarter than Cássio Nunes, so he might be very smart in kind of backing his views in a more legalistic way. But nevertheless, advancing his perspectives over several issues. Like one thing that it was really a concern is that when he was the Minister of Justice, he was requesting the police to investigate critics of the government. So there was, for instance, one lawyer who made a criticism against the president at CNN. In Brazil, he's saying that probably the policies adopted by the president were responsible in part for the deaths of people during the pandemic. And he later on received a notification from the Minister of Justice requesting the opening of this of a police investigation on the basis of a law that was adopted in the dictatorship, and quite recently it was replaced by a new law, which is a law on national security. So he's not necessarily a full Democrat in that sense. And I do think that he will try in a smarter way than the current justice appointed by Bolsonaro, smarter than Cássio Nunes. He will be able to pack his views in a more legalistic way. But nevertheless, he's going to be, you see that the Brazilian Supreme Court, unlike the Supreme Court in the United States, of course, the Supreme Court in the United States is also very politically biased, and you see that according to the appointment and so on. But at the same time, they decide the majority of things, the vast majority of things, as a court, as a group. Here in Brazil, individual justice, although they are part of a larger body, they actually they can do a lot of things by their own. So they can request to postpone the decision of a case. They can send the case to the full plenary if they want. They can give an injunction decision individually, and they can sit on a case and never send the case to be decided. So actually, there are a lot of things that individual justice can do. And we're gonna see how this is gonna play out with him. He has on his docket, because he inherits the docket from the previous justice. So he has on his table basically things like indigenous people's lands. There's one case for LGBT rights, which is the rights of trans and travestis to choose the prison where they're gonna stay according to their gender identity. And this case is actually under Mendonça's responsibility now as a rapporteur of this case. So there are a lot of things that are very important that are in his hands now, and we're gonna see how it's gonna play out.
Before we return to the interview with Thiago, I want to take a minute to ask those of you who can to please support the producers who make the show possible by donating to our Patreon account, patreon.com/Brazil Unfiltered. As an independent podcast, we rely on listeners like you to continue to come out with regular content. Even a small amount every month would go a long way. So let's return to the interview. I want to kind of dive deeply into the Black movement a little bit and talk about that. And I think you know this, that when I was a founder of the first gay movement in Brazil, Somos Grupo de Afirmação Homossexual, I led the left wing of the movement. And one of the first things that we did was to participate in the second public demonstration of the United Black Movement in São Paulo on November 20th, 1979, which was the Day of Black Consciousness, the Day of Zumbi dos Palmares. And we went with a big banner saying against racial discrimination and signed it, Somos Grupo de Afirmação Homossexual. My impression that night was that the Black movement didn't quite know who was coming and joining them, and they weren't at all hostile. I don't think they necessarily embraced us. There was like a question mark in their heads at the time about who is this group and why are they here supporting us? But we understood very clearly the need to build a broad front of Blacks, of feminists, of other people who were marginalized in Brazilian society. Things have changed over the last 40 years. So I'd like you to kind of reflect on your understanding of the history of the Black movement as it's dealt with homophobia and embraced the movement in recent years. What went on there? What's happened there?
So I think that what you're saying is very interesting, and it's an honor for me to listen to this first-hand experience, because I think that when I talk about, for instance, intersectionality to my students or in a lecture, sometimes I show a picture that you see this. I think it was the demonstrations against police violence in São Paulo, and this was like a sign saying against free the travestis and also against racial discrimination. This was like the same sign, you know.
Thiago, I will be proud to say that I literally bought the pano, the cloth, and the paint, and painted those signs myself. Once I made a mistake and I painted the word homosexual with only one S, which is the way it is in Spanish, and there's two S's. And I had to go run out and get another, a piece of cloth to repaint it because I had made a mistake on it. So I very much am connected to that early history.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this is something that make us think that, of course, several ways of oppression, being class, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, race, they all do not necessarily in the practice of social movements do not necessarily sit together in a smooth way, or in sometimes they are, of course, in clash or in contrast. So, for instance, some people might say, well, LGBT movement, sometimes they are dominated or they are overly led by white homosexuals, white men homosexuals, or sometimes they might say, well, the Black movement do not necessarily embrace LGBT people, and sometimes they are hostile to LGBT people. So, or when we had the discussions about race, even in the left-wing parties, political parties, there is a lot of academic writing about the early days of the discrimination of the issue of race in the Labour Party, in PT, and sometimes some activists were saying, well, they did not understand why we need to talk about race when we already have class and things like this. So I think that it's sometimes it's difficult and messy, the practice of how to connect those things. But what we are seeing more and more recently in Brazil is that the mobilization of LGBT people and Black people in Brazil are intertwined in different ways. So intertwined in the ways in which a lot of Congress people or politicians in general, the local level, the state level, and the federal level, connect these two things. So we are seeing, especially under PSOL and other political left-wing political parties, we are seeing this movement of getting Black LGBT people being elected, in a way to say, well, those oppressions are connected and they have a special place to, and they provide a specific perspective over politics. So this is a group that we want to have in politics. So, for instance, like Erika Hilton, Erika Malvin, and others that are more recently being elected. And I think this is a smart move to bring those intersections together. And I think that we have a lot of things in common in a number of issues. Not only, of course, there are Black people that are LGBT, so those people are already, connecting those different ways of viewing the politics and oppression. But also, I think that there are a lot of topics and issues that are already common. So, for instance, police violence. So I see a lot of we are talking about the banner in the early history of movement, but we are seeing that one of the key advocacy points of the LGBT movement is it's against police violence and also thinking about another way of providing public security that encompasses the diversity of the gender, diversity of sexuality. And this is something that is also connected with the demands of the Black movement more recently in providing new insights on public safety, public security, and fighting against police violence. Another area that connects those two is institutional activism. That is, of course, right now with Bolsonaro, it's completely zero. But in a way that Black movements and LGBT movements managed previously before Bolsonaro, they managed to have spaces of participation and be involved in policy making at the federal level and the state and local levels. And I think that it's something that those movements share, and they have to work together also in bringing about different policies for being like real policies, or having participatory spaces like conferences, national, state, municipal conferences, to discuss those issues. I think that that we are living a different time of being very critical about both movements. I've never, quite recently, in the last years, I've never been in a meeting of the Black movements or the LGBT movements that are not talking about those issues intertwined. So I never. It's impossible now to have a LGBT meeting of movements without discussing race, without being very critical about who is speaking and who is there, who is representing us. At the same time, in the a lot of things that are happening in the Black movements are led by queer Black people as well, being people that are involved in the coalition, Black Coalition for Rights, or people that are in politics like Erika Malunguinho. They are actually providing those spaces for Black people. So in Black and queer people. So I think that it's in terms of issues, in terms of activism and institutional activism, in terms of spaces for intersectionality. This is not only intersectionality is not only a abstract concept, but it's really thing. In the practice of those movements. So
it strikes me also. Strikes me also that Bolsonaro's united people in a lot of ways, that they see that they have a common enemy and therefore can unite. What was notable since 2016, but more in 2018, was when anyone denounced the government or the attacks against Dilma Rousseff, they were, especially against Bolsonaro, it was always saying he's homophobic. Was almost the first thing that people said. He was homophobic, he was misogynistic, he was against indigenous rights, he was racist. And so I think in a certain way, he's managed to unite different social movements that perhaps were somewhat fractured. So this comes
also, I think that's one point about that. I think that if we are not united, we are not going to win.
Yeah. Well,
so it's very clear, like that. It's if you do not see a structural oppression along all those lines as interconnected, we are not going to be able to win in terms of elections, in terms of the public debate, in terms of gaining people's minds and hearts to think that this is actually an important issue. So I think that if we divide ourselves, we're not going to be able to win. So I think that it's very clear that those movements are thinking of, now we are thinking about 2022. And when they are thinking about 2022, we can think about the protests that we had right before the pandemic, and more recently in the last months when the vaccination was better, so people could go on the street and so on. We have seen that if you look at what are the largest protests we've seen in Brazil, usually they were about kind of a intersectional issues that can get a lot of people, like fighting against the denial of the pandemic, or fighting for education rights and the freedom in the universities, and things like this. So or fighting for the indigenous rights and the protection of the Amazon. Those topics actually bring a lot of people together. And you see, for instance, when they do in 2018, people that went to the street and organized things were women, Black women, queer women, especially, were organizing the protests against Bolsonaro during the election time. So I think that this was also, and the way that Bolsonaro attacked those movements, especially in between the terms, between the two rounds of the election. This was really a misogynist way to say that, well, look, do you want Bolsonaro saying, do you want me to lose the election and those people win, those people that do not like family, those people that, those things that do not make any sense, because those people have families, those people are family, those people are, he portrayed the left as, this bunch of people that want to destroy our way of life. And this was part of his rhetoric. But I think that more and more, if you look at the numbers in the polls, we see that more and more people think that racism is an issue that is important in the country. More and more people accept LGBT people, and more people think, for instance, that the climate and environment is an issue that is important in the presidential candidacy. So I think that we are moving together because it's the only way to move, I think.
Right. So it jumps right into the big question of the day. So the presumptive candidate in the front is Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. He's polling around 40 to 45%, depending on the poll. Bolsonaro is slipping. And there's two things that are happening. One is that Lula or people in his campaign are sending out some indications that he might consider as his vice presidential candidate, Geraldo Alckmin, who was the former governor of the state of São Paulo, actually ran against Lula in the past and against Dilma, and was badly defeated both times. But in fact, the first time he ran, he lost votes in the second round of the election, and in 18 he only got 4.8% of the votes. This is a gesture by Lula, it seems, to show that he's moderate, that he's not going to nationalize televisions and destroy the economy, that he's going to favor the continuation of capitalism. It runs its risk because Alckmin has been connected to Opus Dei, the conservative sectors of the Catholic Church, and has generally towed the line of conservative. How are you understanding this process that Lula is seeking out more moderate forces, whether it's PSDB, whether it's Alckmin, or whether it's someone else? What do you see? What are the dangers? What are the pitfalls of this process?
Yeah, I think that of course Lula is a front runner, and we see that he's likely to win. But first of all, I think that we need to be very conscious about celebrating victory beforehand, because I think that in the election, I already wrote that in the newspaper, saying that election is you only decide by, it's a game that you only decide by playing, because we do not know exactly how the polls would look like and once the election actually starts, and we have debates, or we have political campaigns, and how it's going to, and all the candidates will be there, and it will be settled who are the candidates. So I think that we need to be very conscious about the kind of environment that I'm listening in left-wing circles and progressive circles, saying, well, it's already done, Bolsonaro is a matter of time. I think we need to be very conscious about that. Second, I think that maybe Lula's prediction is like this. It's that he has two concerns, really. One is how low can go Bolsonaro, in terms of he has constantly kept a fraction of the electorate in his hands throughout the whole presidency. Even when we are hitting more than 4,000 people being killed by the pandemic, and he was denying everything, still people were around 20 and 20-something% of people were supporting Bolsonaro. The question is this enough for him to go to the second round, or is it enough for him to lose in the first round against Lula, or he can go even lower? And if he goes even lower, those votes to go somewhere. And the question is, and the second question is how Moro, or all the forces that are around Moro, will be able to how they're going to perform. Because some analysts were saying that, well, we should not take into consideration, rule out the possibility of having the second round with Lula and Moro instead of Bolsonaro. If Bolsonaro is really hits a low bottom, and he doesn't manage to go to the second round. So I think that Lula, what he might be thinking is that, well, I need to get some votes out of this of Moro and his and the people who are who say that they are moderate or centered, so they do not want to vote for Bolsonaro, and they do not want to vote for Lula, so they want to vote to someone on someone else, and they either go to Ciro or to Moro or some other candidate. And probably what Lula is trying to do is that he's trying to get some votes from these people that would see Lula more appealing if he has a vice president as Alckmin. I don't know. This is risky because I think that Lula is already thinking that he's very unlikely going to lose any votes that he already has, because he has a strong character and he has people identify with him. So I know that people that vote in Bolsonaro in 2018 that are considering voting Lula now, because they like the personality and they like the person of Lula, regardless of the party or something like this. So I think that Lula is betting that, well, I'm not going to lose votes that I already have. So how can I gain more? So he's doing probably two movements. One is that he's talking constantly about evangelicals. So probably to get some votes out of the evangelicals that vote for Bolsonaro in the first round. Not all of them, of course, voted, but part of them, a large part of them. And so get those votes from Bolsonaro, and to get some votes from those people who do not necessarily vote for Lula as a first option, and they are already not satisfied with Bolsonaro. But if they see Lula as more center, they would vote for him as either in the first round or the second round. So I think that's his betting. So I think that, for me, I would say that the politics is not a science of the ideal. It's a science of what actually it's possible and feasible in a certain historical time. I really regret that we do not have a united opposition against Bolsonaro, because my fear is that this election should be a referendum about Bolsonaro. This should not be an election that we will be discussing how it's going to be the presidency of Lula or someone else. We should all be voting against Bolsonaro and not necessarily in favor of someone else. And for that to happen, we would need a united opposition against Bolsonaro, as we are seeing in the Czech Republic, or we are seeing in Hungary now with elections next year. This is something that I regret that we do not manage to do. And I think partly what Lula is trying to do is by considering at least putting Alckmin there. It's this kind of move. But the problem that in Brazil we have these other candidates, and we have the force of motive that we do not know how big it can be, and we'll only be able to see this during the election. In terms of policy, I think that in the sphere of PSDB, the Social Democratic Party, in which for which the Alckmin ran for election, and also he was governor for many years for this party. I think that in that sphere, Alckmin is, I would say, he's more center than right. And if you compare to other candidates like the young gay governor from Rio Grande do Sul, who flirts with Bolsonaro, flirted with Bolsonaro during the election. After everything that happened with the pandemic, Eduardo Leite, the governor from Rio de Janeiro, from Rio Grande do Sul, he said, well, he kind of did not blame completely Bolsonaro, and also he did not say that he would not vote for Bolsonaro in 2018. So this was really disappointment for any Democrat or any progressive to say, well, there's still people who pretend that they are new kind of politics. They are doing a new kind of politics, but actually they are following the worst what we have in politics, which is Bolsonaro. So I think that it's possible to have a government with Alckmin and Lula, and a government would not be that different from the Lula's government, in the sense that Lula's government was actually not so much. It was more center left than anything else. And so I think that this is possible. But I regret that it was not more a united position with other candidates. And finally, I want to say that of course we are talking a lot about Bolsonaro, and of course we are talking a lot about how to win over Bolsonaro, because he's really destroying several aspects of public life in Brazil. But also, we need to be very critical about what kind of new normal we want after Bolsonaro. So what kind of demands of progressive and left-wing politics we need to ask from Lula or whoever is gonna win.
What are those?
No, I think that first, to discuss seriously public security and policing reform. I remember that Lula and also Dilma did not want to touch, especially Dilma didn't want to touch on public security. But Lula actually did some things that were quite bad, especially for incarceration, like the war on drugs law, the law on drugs, or supports in the military in terms of involvement of the military in the public security. Things that Lula did that he really needs to be critical about those things and to present policing reform and presenting a new way of thinking about public security, because public security in Brazil is very dominated by the right-wing parties, and this kind of their winning card. Bolsonaro is very clear in the message saying that, well, if there's crime, you should have a gun at home and you should use it. So of course this is bad, that this doesn't work, and we know that doesn't work. This does not work as a matter of policy. But for common people, this is very clear message, and they can understand that. And what kind of message the left wing can bring about public security that common people can actually understand, right? So this is one thing. And second is that trying to find a way of talking about sexuality, talking about gender, talking about race in a way that is that brings more people to the table instead of being used as a weapon to divide people. So sometimes Lula and Dilma were kind of ambiguous about things such as abortion or things as trying to push for LGBT marriage, for same-sex marriage before the Congress. So of course there were initiatives by the people from the Labour Party in the Congress, for instance. But even when Lula had a very strong majority in the parliament, he was not pushing for this as part of a package, and he could use his political leverage to do so when he had like these very high numbers of approval. So I think that to demand a new normal, it's something very critical. And I know that the movements, Black movement and LGBT movements that are gladly participating in politics, they are not going to be silent. They are not going to be silent even if it's under Lula administration. They are going to demand for change and for a new normal that is not only a repetition of what we had before Bolsonaro, but actually have been critical of their own policies. Because if we don't have that, we're not going to have the future for our democracy improved in a way that we should have. And I'm concerned about, I think about alchemy. I think that in the practical terms, it might be a change in terms of the in terms of the optics, in terms of how we're going to see the ticket, how we're going to see the Lula's candidacy. But I don't think it is a matter of practical policy making. It's not going to make such a difference, because
unless, and we keep in mind the history of vice presidents who become presidents in Brazil. There's a long tradition.
Well, if
we think of Dilma and the fact that the Workers' Party was kind of forced into a majority coalition with the PMDB, which required Michel Temer to be the vice president, and we saw how he very quickly turned against Dilma. That PMDB turned against Dilma when there was an attempt to rout out corruption within the PMDB. So the question would be, are you inviting into your home someone who might stab you in the back?
Yeah, but I think that I think the question is that whether Alckmin is coming to the party as a person or as a political party or as a political group. So I think that what probably Lula is counting on, and we do not know whether he's going to be the vice president.
Right. This is just speculation.
Yeah, but I think that what he's counting on is that Alckmin would come as a figure, as a person, because unlike PMDB in the Michel Temer's time, the Social Democrats, the PSDB, is not going to be part of the Lula's administration ever, especially if they are still dominated by Doria or by Aécio Neves, or Eduardo Leite, who are clearly anti-PT. So I think that they are not going to be part of the administration. The question is whether Alckmin is entering with a hidden agenda of bringing his political group and trying to dominate and trying to win the presidency after all, like Temer did. Or, but I think even if he has those intentions, he's not going to have the political power to do so, because he doesn't have that much political power as the PMDB.
And we know that Lula has the confidence to think that he can charm and control anyone, but Lula is not immortal.
Yes.
You know, things happen to people, and this is one of the concerns we have. So you mentioned another name which is important in this equation, which is Sergio Moro, who announced that he is a presidential candidate, essentially, in the political party Podemos. I guess is the name of the party and translated into English. A person who claimed he was not interested ever in politics. He never had presidential aspirations. Suddenly, after being involved in the conviction of Lula so that Lula couldn't be a candidate, was appointed Minister of Justice, and now is presidential candidate criticizing Lula. What do you think? What do you think the outcome might be of that candidacy?
I think it's very sad from a progressive perspective. It's very sad that people are normalizing the fact that Sergio Moro is a candidate. For me, sometimes it looks like we are stuck in Brazilian soap opera, without, of course, running the risk of being stereotypical. It's the sense that, you have look at the three main candidates. We have the Lula, who were in prison for a long time in an unfair trial. You have the judge who convicted Lula and prevent him from basically running for the previous election. And you have the guy who is completely incompetent for the job, who won the election because because of the conviction of the Lula, and the other guy, the Sergio Moro, was the Minister of Justice of this government. So it's really like I think a writer for the soap opera will not be able to put all those things together. And I think that it's very hard. It's very sad that I see, especially in my colleagues in the media, I see a lot of them normalize the fact that you have a former judge who was completely biased, was part of politics when he was a judge, was part of politics when he was the Minister of Justice, and now is a part of politics officially when he's running for candidacy. This should not be normal in a democracy that thinks that separation of powers is important, that thinks that fair trial is important. This should not happen. Secondly, I think that it's very sad that people are normalizing his own policies as if he was kind of a center guy who is in favor of anti-corruption or in favor of basic rights or things like this. Clearly, he's not. If you look at what he did as a Minister of Justice, he was in favor, and I always remember these people because people tend to forget. In the beginning of the pandemic, when he was still the Minister of Justice, he asked the Minister of Justice actually said that they were considering putting sick prisoners and older prisoners, instead of letting them organize in the way that they would leave leave, especially the non-violent criminals, the people in prison, incarcerated. They, instead of letting them go to out of prison, and because Brazil is the third largest, Brazil has the third largest incarceration population in the whole planet. He was actually suggesting to put people in containers. And separating them and putting them in containers. This is the same guy who already said that incarceration is not such a big problem in Brazil because we have a big population. This is the same guy who proposed officially in a package on public security. He proposed in increasing the discretionality of the police to kill. If under distress, if they're under distress, they can kill and not be subject to accountability. This is the same. This is the same guy who was in a very famous meeting with the ministers and Bolsonaro, where in which a lot of absurds were speaking. So were saying. So like one thing that happened is that the Minister of Environment he said that, well, now we should move forward and actually approve all those flexibilization of environmental rules and environmental issues. Because people are only concerned about pandemic, so we should do that. And he was quiet about that. People were making threats against the ministers of Supreme Court, and Moro was quiet about that. So this is the same guy who did all those things, apart from the fact that he led a very politically biased trial. So this is the same guy who now is coming as, oh, we need. He said in his speech, we need to fight against hunger, and we need to fight against poverty because it's our priority. Even being being part of the government, who actually destroys several social policies and only use social politics as election leverage, like Bolsonaro is doing now. And also is a guy who is saying, well, we should fight against corruption. Even being part of the government, who actually clearly wanted to be to make interference in the federal police, did not advance anything in terms of anti-corruption, and now he wants to present himself as the hero, that is someone who's actually ended the corruption in Brazil. I think that so. In terms of the public debate, I think it's very sad, but also it's very symptomatic of the way we think about politics. Is that a person like Sergio Moro is normalized as it's just another candidate. It's absurd that we are normalized the way the politics and the judiciary are so intertwined, and how our elections, especially the election in 2018, was very problematic in that sense because of all the trials and everything that happened. And also, I think that it's we need to be to bear in mind what are the social contexts that we are living now. The polls that we have now is showing that the corruption in 2018 was on the top of the issues that people think it's most important, the more pressing issues in the country. Now, corruption is not even on the 5 top issues in the country for the electorate, in the sense that it's not that corruption is not an issue. Of course it is, we need to think about it, and we need to have a serious policy about it. But at the same time, it's people are dying of hunger, literally. And so I think that we are in a completely different kind of setting, and in which we really need to think about progressive policies that address those issues that we thought that will not come back to Brazil, but are coming back very fast, like the hunger and the access to basic nutrition, which is something that we managed to overcome, or at least address heavily in the previous government, especially under Lula, and now it's completely chaotic. So I'm afraid that Sergio Moro will be able to portray himself as a moderate. Even not being a moderate. I'm afraid that he's going to convince people that he's like he's partly like Bolsonaro, but he's less idiotic. He's just he can speak and make a complete sentence. But I think that this is very dangerous, because in the core, in the end of the day, he was there applauding, and he was there for a while. Not only being part of the government, but actually he made that government possible. And I think we should never forget that.
Just one last question. I want to talk a little bit about a very important public figure, Jean Willis, the Congress person from Rio de Janeiro, who was the first openly gay candidate to be elected to Congress, who was an advocate for LGBTQ rights, and suffered tremendous attacks by the right and many death threats, and decided after Bolsonaro was elected, even though he had been, Jean Willis had been elected to a 3rd term, to leave the country and go into exile. Was Jean Willis a reference for you? He is one of the kind of figures that you've looked to as a kind of a model, as a person of African descent, and also very openly proud of his sexuality?
Yes, I think that Jean Willis was one of the, well, it was the first cousin that I look at and think, well, it's possible to be gay and be in that and defend and advance rights or defend rights both of LGBT people and Black people in politics, in being part of the political party, being part of the Congress, and I think he was one of the first figures that I had in mind, and when I thought when I was growing up and think, well, this is possible, and it's possible to be part of the change. So I think he was actually one of the people that opened the doors for this, and I think that also being, I think he has a way of being unapologetic. So the way he was really angry at Bolsonaro during the Dilma's impeachment, and the way he was really vocal against and I think one of the qualities of Jean Willis is that he's very clear, very straightforward in terms of saying, well, this is just atrocities that the government is doing, or those people are defending nothing less than atrocities. And so I think that he's very straightforward in that sense, and he's very clear in that sense. And having someone who is very vocal in our community and being able to represent us there, I think it's very important. Also, I think that he not only he personally, but also the movements that were around the LGBT movements that were around politics, they opened the door for other people as well to be there in politics. And I think that also what the story of John Willis taught me is that sometimes being the face of change also brings not only responsibility but also personal cost. In a way that he had to leave the country. He was receiving a lot of threats, and he really also shows that being one of the faces of the change comes at a great cost, especially in a context where people were openly in favor of violence and people are openly in favor of political violence against candidates or against people who are already elected. So I think that it really made me think that it's possible to be there, it's possible to be part of the change, but also he made me think about the personal costs of that. So myself, for instance, of course, nothing compared to what happened with him, but I receive constantly hate messages, I already received death threats. I never post anything. I never post that I'm in a place when I'm in that place. I always post when I already left, in a way to not, I don't know, someone see me down in that place and then go after me or something like this. I don't read comments on the column that I write for the newspaper, which is regretful because sometimes there are good comments, critical but good comments, but I do not read because for me it's like a personal, I need to block that in order to have some kind of mental health. Even now, this semester, I'm in New York City now doing a postdoc in NYU, but not only, of course, for academic reasons and professional reasons, but also for personal reasons. I wanted to be out of the country for 6 months to, to have a clear mind, and also because the 2022 is going to be very tough and challenging for anyone who's speaking out. So I think that John Willis taught me that it's possible, and it's we have to do it, and we have to do it in an intersectional way, and we have to do it in an unapologetic way. We are not asking for favors for being in those spaces. We are part of those spaces, and we should be in those spaces, the political spaces. But I think also he showed me how this comes as a great cost.
And I'm seeing in this interview and the brilliance of your mind, the way that you are so articulate about political issues, something very similar to John Willis's talent in this regard. So who knows what will happen in your future in positive ways. I want to thank you so much for spending time with us today. It was a really wonderful conversation. I'm looking forward to seeing you again in São Paulo when I get there in March. And thank you so much for joining us today on Brazil Unfiltered.
Thank you very much, James. It was a great pleasure.
I hope that you're enjoying the program. If you are watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do so. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a 5-star review to help other people find the program. Have a great week. Until next time, até a próxima.